The rain had been falling since dawn, tracing silver veins down the cracked window of the Blue Diner, a forgotten little place on the corner of 3rd Avenue and Hope Street, where dreams usually came to die quietly. Behind the counter, Naomi Carter, 26, scrubbed at the same coffee stain for the 5th time that morning. Her apron was faded, her sneakers soaked through, and her thoughts far away at St. Luke's Hospital, where her father lay fighting for his life on a waiting list too long for mercy. When the doorbell chimed, Naomi barely looked up. But the woman who entered didn't belong to this world of chipped tables and cheap filter coffee. Her coat was ivory cashmere, her heels the color of moonlight. A diamond bracelet flashed when she set down her umbrella. The kind of woman Naomi had only ever seen on television, the kind that looked untouchable. "Are you Naomi Carter?" the woman asked, her voice calm but sharp as glass. Naomi hesitated. "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you?" "I'm Madeline Gray," the woman said, slipping off her gloves one finger at a time. "I'm here to offer you a job." Madeline slid a white envelope across the counter. Inside, Naomi caught a glimpse of crisp bills, 50s and 100s, stacked in unsettling precision. "I don't understand," Naomi murmured. "What kind of job pays this much?" The woman leaned in her perfume, something cold and expensive filling the air. 3 days, she said quietly. "That's all I need you for. 3 days, and this will be yours. $50,000. Naomi froze, the words sinking like stones in her chest. 50,000. For what? Madeline's eyes glinted like blue steel. For you to seduce my husband. The diner seemed to go silent. Even the rain outside paused, as if waiting for Naomi to laugh, to refuse to walk away. But she didn't. She couldn't. "You want me to what?" "Don't act surprised," Madeline said evenly. "My husband is Ethan Gray. You've heard the name?" Naomi had. The man was a legend in New York, founder of Gray Tech, one of the most powerful technology empires on the East Coast. A billionaire with a reputation for brilliance and arrogance, married to a woman as polished as his reputation was ruthless. "I want the world to see the kind of man he really is." Madeline continued. "Cold, disloyal, corrupt. He's destroyed everything we built together. I just need proof, and you're going to give it to me." Naomi's throat felt dry. "Why me?" Madeline studied her with unsettling calm. "Because you're exactly his type. Young, simple, the kind of woman he thinks he can rescue." For a moment, Naomi almost laughed. Her rescue, the last man who'd promised her that, had walked away the night her mother died, leaving her a little sister to raise and a pile of unpaid bills. "I can't do this," she whispered, shaking her head. "Whatever's wrong between you two, I'm not." Madeline's voice cut her off like a blade. "I know about your father." Naomi's heart stopped. "What did you say?" "I know he's on the transplant list. I know you've missed 2 payments on his dialysis. I know the hospital will stop treatment in a week." The woman's words hit like a punch. Naomi gripped the counter for balance, humiliation and fear burning through her. $50,000, Madeline said again, softly now, almost tenderly. "It's enough to cover the surgery deposit. Enough to buy you time. All you have to do is have dinner with my husband, stay close to him, and record what happens. You won't have to go that far unless you choose to. Just let him believe you could." Naomi felt her breath falter. The fluorescent light above flickered the diner, suddenly too small, too loud, too cruel. She thought of her father's weak smile that morning, when she promised she'd figure something out. Of her sister's tearful voice asking, "Will Daddy come home soon?" And she thought of the envelope of what $50,000 meant in a life where she had never had more than 500. "Why are you doing this?" Naomi finally asked. Madeline's expression didn't change. Because I loved him once, and I need to stop loving him before he destroys me completely. The woman stood, adjusted her coat, and slid a card across the counter. The driver will pick you up tomorrow at 8 a.m. He'll take you to the Hudson estate. Pack light. Naomi stared at the card until the doorbell jingled again and Madeline Gray disappeared into the rain. That night, Naomi walked the 4 blocks home through the storm. The streets shimmered with puddles and neon, every reflection a question she couldn't answer. At the hospital, her father slept under the sterile hum of machines, his chest rising and falling with fragile rhythm. She sat beside him, holding his cold hand, whispering into the dark. What would you do? Daddy, if it was me lying there. There was no answer, only the slow mechanical beep of the monitor and the faint smell of antiseptic. She opened the envelope again. The money felt unreal beneath her fingertips, like touching someone else's life. The next morning, Naomi stood before the mirror in her one good dress. Her reflection was tired, her eyes red from a night without sleep. She looked neither like a seductress nor a savior, just a daughter who'd run out of choices. Outside, a black car idled by the curb, rain still falling in fine, endless threads. The driver stepped out and held the door for her. Mrs. Gray sent me, he said. Naomi hesitated on the sidewalk. Somewhere deep in her chest, something whispered that she was about to cross a line she could never uncross. But then she thought of her father again, of the sound of his breath through the oxygen tube. And she stepped into the car. The city blurred past gray and silver and merciless. She pressed her palm against the cold window, wondering what kind of man waited for her at the end of this road, the man she was being paid to betray. And yet, as the car turned toward the river and the skyline shimmered through the rain, a quiet thought surfaced in her mind, one that refused to leave her. What if he isn't the villain in this story? What if I am? Sometimes life doesn't offer choices, it offers crossroads. If you've ever done something wrong for the right reason, you'll understand Naomi's silence that day. The Hudson River glimmered like liquid steel beneath the morning fog as the black car turned off the main road and onto a long, winding driveway lined with naked oak trees. At its end stood a house that looked more like a fortress than a home. Gray stone tall windows and silence thick enough to echo. Naomi Carter pressed her hands together to hide their trembling. She had been many things in her life, a waitress, a daughter, a sister, but never someone who stepped into a billionaire's mansion with a secret that could break her soul. A butler met her at the door. His face was unreadable, his tone polished. Mrs. Gray mentioned you'd be joining us temporarily, he said. You'll be assisting in light housekeeping and meal preparation. Mr. Gray values discretion above all else. The words, Mr. Gray seemed to fill the air with their own weight. Naomi's first glimpse of Ethan Gray came through a reflection. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, his back to her, watching the rain glide down the glass. His reflection was sharper than most men's realities, broad shoulders, clean lines, silver at his temples. Set the tray on the desk, he said, without turning. His voice wasn't cold. It was controlled as if every word was measured, every breath accounted for. Naomi placed the tray down, black coffee, no sugar, and waited for him to dismiss her. Instead, he spoke again, his tone quieter. You're new. Yes, sir. Just for a few days, she said softly. He finally turned. His eyes gray like the river behind him met hers. There was no arrogance in them, no flash of recognition or desire, just the weary calm of a man who'd seen too much and trusted too little. People don't last long here, he said simply. It's too quiet for most. I don't mind quiet, Naomi replied. Sometimes silence is kinder than noise. Something flickered in his gaze, almost imperceptible. A small nod. Then he turned back to the window. You can go. The first days passed in slow rhythm. The ticking of clocks, the whisper of rain against glass, the distant sound of Ethan's footsteps echoing down marble halls. Naomi cleaned, cooked, arranged the flowers that always seemed to die too soon in the cold air. Every evening she saw him at the same spot by the window, staring at the horizon like a man waiting for someone who would never return. Rumor had painted him as ruthless, a heartless genius who'd built an empire and buried his humanity along the way. But what Naomi saw was something else entirely, a man who had lost the ability to belong anywhere. Once she found a photograph on the piano, Ethan younger standing beside another man, who looked almost identical, except for his smile. When she asked the butler, he hesitated. "Mr. Gray's brother," he said. "He passed away 3 years ago. Accident. Mr. Gray blames himself." That night, Naomi understood the haunted stillness in the man's eyes. Grief had many faces. His wore the shape of composure. By the third night, she'd grown accustomed to the sound of his insomnia, the faint shuffle of papers at 2 a.m., the footsteps in the hallway, the glow of light under his study door. It was during one of those sleepless hours that her phone rang. The hospital. Her father's condition had worsened. They needed an advance payment immediately for emergency dialysis. Naomi's breath caught. She looked at the screen at the number she could no longer afford to answer. And then she broke. In that quiet kitchen surrounded by polished marble and silver cutlery that cost more than her entire life, she pressed her palms to her face and cried. She didn't hear Ethan enter. "What happened?" His voice came from the doorway, low, steady, but laced with concern. Naomi froze, trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry, Mr. Gray. I didn't mean to wake anyone." "You didn't." He stepped closer, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between them. "You shouldn't cry alone in the dark. It makes the night crueler." Naomi shook her head. It's family stuff. Nothing I can't handle." Ethan studied her quietly, then looked down at the trembling hands she tried to hide. "Everyone has a limit," he said. "Even the strong ones." He walked to the counter, picked up a pen, and tore a page from a notepad. When he turned back, he placed a check beside her elbow. She blinked, confused, until she saw the number written on it. $10,000. "I can't take that," she said quickly. "I didn't say it was charity," he replied. "Consider it an advance. You can repay it. Someday." "I don't know if I can." "Then call it a favor owed," he said simply, sliding it closer. Naomi felt her throat tighten. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." For the first time, he met her eyes without the walls, the armor. "I don't know what you're running from, Miss Carter," he said softly, "but I think someone out there needs you more than you need your pride." The words sank into her like warmth after a long winter. Before she could answer, he turned and walked away, his figure swallowed by the shadows of the hallway. The kitchen light flickered once and steadied, as if even the house had been holding its breath. Naomi looked down at the check in her hands. The ink was still wet. The name Ethan Gray stamped across the bottom with a confidence that belonged to a man used to saving others, never himself. She didn't cash it that night. She sat at the table until dawn, listening to the rain. Somewhere upstairs, she heard his footsteps pacing again, and she wondered if behind all the wealth and power, Ethan Gray was just another lost soul trying to pay for a sin that had no price. When the sun rose, painting the river gold, Naomi stood by the window he always watched from. She touched the cold glass, tracing the reflection of her own face, where his usually appeared. For a moment she thought she understood him, not the billionaire, not the myth, but the man behind the glass. The one who had everything yet couldn't sleep through a single night. The one who gave away money, not out of generosity, but as if redemption came printed on every check. Naomi pressed the check to her chest and whispered to no one in particular, "You're not the monster they say you are." And though he couldn't hear her, Ethan Gray, in the room above, paused for a long moment before the sound of pacing began again. The night settled over the Hudson like velvet, dark, heavy, and filled with secrets. The Gray estate stood in silence, its windows glowing faintly against the mist. Inside, the world smelled of cedarwood and rain, of books unopened and grief unspoken. Naomi stood in the kitchen staring at the small brown vial on the counter. Madeline Gray's words still echoed through her mind, a few drops in his milk. He'll relax, lose his composure. Take a picture, a video if you can. After that, your father's surgery is guaranteed. The vial glimmered under the kitchen light, innocent as salvation, poisonous as betrayal. Naomi's hands shook as she poured milk into a saucepan. The warmth rose slowly, fogging the edges of her vision. She thought of her father's fragile breath, of the unpaid hospital bills piling on her bedside table, of the way Ethan Gray had looked at her the night before, not with suspicion, but something quieter, something that felt like recognition. And then she thought of the number printed on the check in her purse. $10,000 untouched, because somehow it hadn't felt like hers to take. It was close to midnight when Ethan appeared in the doorway. He wasn't wearing the armor of his usual self, no jacket, no tie, no distance. Just a white shirt, sleeves rolled, and a look that belonged to someone who hadn't slept in years. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said softly. "I could smell the milk from upstairs." Naomi nearly dropped the spoon. "You could smell? Oh, I was just making warm milk." His tone held the faintest trace of amusement. "It's been years since anyone made that here." He stepped closer, his presence filling the room like quiet thunder. "You know," he continued, "the smell reminds me of my mother. She used to make it for me when I couldn't sleep." Naomi swallowed hard, the lie already forming on her tongue. "It's for me I couldn't sleep either." But the truth slipped out instead. "It's for you." Their eyes met across the kitchen, his gray and weary, hers dark and guilty. For a moment, the only sound was the slow simmer of milk. Ethan tilted his head, studying her. "For me," Naomi forced a small smile. "You've been awake most nights. I thought maybe it would help." He leaned against the counter, watching her in silence. "That's kind of you." And then, almost as an afterthought, "People rarely do kind things without wanting something in return." Her stomach tightened. "I don't want anything." "Then you're rarer than I thought." He took the glass from her hands, his fingers brushing against hers. Warm, steady, undeserved. Naomi froze. Her pulse raced. The vial in her pocket suddenly felt like a stone burning through fabric. He lifted the glass to his lips, then paused. "Strange," he murmured. "I don't remember asking for milk." Naomi's throat closed. "You didn't." "Then why do I feel," he said gently, "that this isn't about the milk at all?" She tried to laugh, to shrug, to be anyone other than the trembling liar she had become. But her hand betrayed her, knocking the small vial from her pocket. It hit the tile with a sharp crack, the tiny sound of guilt made visible. They both stared at it, the bottle rolling to a stop between them. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "Miss Carter," he said quietly. "What is that?" Naomi bent to pick it up, her voice trembling. "It's nothing, just vitamins. I dropped it. Vitamins." His tone was calm, But his gaze was not. He stepped forward, closing the distance until she could feel the weight of his attention. "Then why do you look like you're about to cry?" Naomi clutched the vial. "Please, Mr. Gray, don't what he asked. Don't see you. Don't ask questions. Don't believe that someone could be kind just to be kind." The air between them thickened with everything unspoken. Naomi looked up, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't want to do this," she whispered. "I swear I didn't." Ethan's voice softened. "Then what did you want, Naomi?" Her lips trembled around the truth. "To save someone I love." For a long moment he said nothing. Only the sound of rain tapping against the window filled the silence. Finally he reached over, took the vial from her hand, and set it on the counter. "I don't know who put you up to this," he said evenly, "and I'm not sure I want to. But I can tell you something. Miss Carter, nothing good ever comes from saving one life by destroying another." She lowered her head, ashamed. "You should fire me." "Should I?" His voice was unreadable. "Maybe. But something tells me that wouldn't help either of us sleep any better." He turned, then hesitated at the doorway. Without looking back, he said, almost gently, "I don't need the milk, Naomi. I need something real." When the door closed behind him, the kitchen felt hollow, as if he'd taken the warmth with him. Naomi sank to the floor, her back against the cold cabinet, the broken vial glinting near her foot. Tears slid silently down her face, not just for what she'd almost done, but for the terrifying realization that she no longer wanted to hurt him at all. She pressed her palms to her eyes, whispering, "What have I become?" For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the victim of a cruel world. She felt like its accomplice. Upstairs, Ethan sat in his study staring out at the dark river. He should have been angry, furious even, but instead, he felt something unexpected. Pity. Not for her lies, but for the desperation behind them. He had seen that look before in the mirror on the night his brother died, when guilt had made him a stranger to himself. He took a pen, opened his ledger, and wrote her name quietly in the margin. Not as an employee, not as a threat, as someone he wanted to understand. In the kitchen below, Naomi gathered the broken glass, her hands shaking. The milk had cooled, forming a thin layer of skin on top. She poured it down the sink and watched the white swirl vanish into the drain, like innocence dissolving in silence. When she finally went upstairs, she stopped outside his study. The light was still on. Through the door, she could see him sitting there, still unreadable, but not angry. Just tired. Just human. And for reasons she couldn't explain, Naomi whispered into the empty hallway, "I'm sorry, Ethan." The house gave no answer, only the faint hum of the river beyond, steady, forgiving, endless. That night, neither of them slept. One out of guilt, the other out of forgiveness. And between them, somewhere in the dark, something fragile began to shift. Not love, not yet, but the trembling shape of truth. The morning came gray and windless, the kind of morning that didn't ask permission to ruin what peace the night had left. Naomi woke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. She reached for it, half asleep, but the moment her eyes landed on the screen, her world tilted. Breaking news. Billionaire Ethan Gray caught in scandal with housemaid. The photo blazed across every news site, Ethan's hand brushing her shoulder in the kitchen, her face half turned toward him, the angle cruel and suggestive. In the frame, the spilled milk glistened like proof of something indecent. The caption was worse: the reclusive tech mogul and his secret affair with a black housemaid betrayal in the Gray mansion. Naomi's chest clenched. The photo wasn't blurry. It was perfect, too perfect. The kind of image that didn't happen by accident. By noon, it was everywhere. Television, tabloids, Twitter. And by afternoon, Ethan Gray's name was no longer a symbol of genius, but gossip. The board of Graytech convened an emergency session. By evening, he was suspended, pending investigation. Reporters camped outside his estate gates, their lenses like rifles, trained at every movement inside. Naomi tried to stay hidden in the servants' quarters, trembling with every shout that echoed beyond the windows. She wanted to tell him she was sorry. She wanted to confess everything, but the shame felt like barbed wire wrapped around her throat. The house, once quiet, now breathed like a living thing, restless, watching. Ethan didn't speak to her all morning. He remained in his study phone calls, brief and cold, voice stripped of anything resembling life. When she brought in his tea, he barely glanced up. "Thank you," he murmured, and the two words cut deeper than anger ever could. Naomi lingered, twisting her hands. "Sir, He looked up then, and the weariness in his eyes stopped her. "Whatever you're about to say," he said quietly, "wait until tomorrow. The truth can survive one more day without words." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the truth could survive at all. By evening, the reporters had grown impatient. When Naomi tried to slip through the back gate to catch a bus to the hospital hoping to check on her father, a swarm of paparazzi found her. They shouted questions that sliced like knives. "How long has it been going on? Does he pay you? Were you his mistress or his maid?" Naomi clutched her bag, eyes burning. When one of them grabbed her arm, the flash of a camera exploded too close, and then another and another, until all she could see was light and noise and shame. Someone shoved her. Her knees hit the pavement. The sound of laughter, low, male cruel, filled the air. And then it stopped. A voice cut through the chaos, low, commanding, unmistakable. "Get away from her." Ethan. He was suddenly there, stepping between her and the crowd like a wall of breath and fury. The photographers froze, startled by the sight of him drenched from the rain, his jaw set like stone. He pulled Naomi to her feet, his arms steady around her shoulders. "If anyone touches her again," he said, his voice calm but lethal, "you'll be hearing from my lawyers." The cameras clicked madly, desperate to capture this new tableau, the billionaire shielding the maid. But this time Ethan didn't hide. He turned toward them, the flashlights painting his face in harsh white light, and said, "The only thing that mattered, if someone has to take responsibility, it will be me." Back inside, Naomi trembled by the doorway, while he shut the heavy doors behind them. Rainwater dripped from his hair, tracing down the collar of his shirt. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. "They'll use it against you. Let them." He loosened his tie, his voice low. "The truth doesn't need defending. It only needs surviving." Naomi's voice cracked. "You don't understand. This was never supposed to happen. I didn't. What he asked softly. Didn't plan to get caught. She flinched, tears welling up. "Didn't mean to hurt you." Something in his gaze softened. Then, not pity, not anger, something quieter, sadder. "Then why, Naomi?" She couldn't hold it anymore. The lie had rotted too long inside her, so she told him. Everything. How Madeline had approached her. The money, the promise, the vial of relaxant, the photo, the setup. Her words tumbled out like stones from a broken dam, raw and trembling. When she finished, she couldn't look at him. "I'll leave tonight," she whispered. "I'll tell them it was all my fault. Maybe they'll believe." "Stop." Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. He crossed the room and stood before her. His eyes were unreadable, like the river at dusk, deep gray, impossible to measure. When he finally spoke, his words were softer than forgiveness, and twice as devastating. "I know, Naomi." She looked up in disbelief. "You knew?" He nodded once. "From the day you arrived." Her breath caught. "Then why didn't you stop me?" Ethan sighed, his hands clasped behind his back as he turned toward the rain-streaked window. "Because," he said slowly, "sometimes it's not the lie that matters, but the moment someone chooses to tell the truth." Naomi stared at him, the full weight of what he'd said sinking deep into her chest. "You wanted to see if I'd admit it. I wanted to believe you'd choose honesty, not because you were caught, but because you couldn't live with the lie." A tear slipped down her cheek. "And if I hadn't?" He turned, then his expression both weary and kind. "Then I would have been wrong about you." Outside, the reporters still shouted beyond the gates. The rain still fell. The world still waited for the next headline. But inside that quiet room, for the first time, neither of them hid. Naomi broke down, her sobs muffled against her sleeve. Ethan stood beside her, not comforting, not judging, simply there. Two people bound, not by scandal, but by something far rarer. The fragile mercy that comes when the truth finally arrives too late, yet somehow still matters. By midnight, the storm eased. Ethan walked her to the door of her quarters, stopping under the dim hallway light. "Madeline did this to hurt me," he said, "but she's wrong about one thing." Naomi lifted her eyes to his. "What's that?" She thought I couldn't feel anymore. He smiled faintly. "A tired, fleeting thing. But tonight, I felt everything." And before she could answer, he turned and disappeared into the shadows of the hall, leaving her alone with her heartbeat, the rain, and the echo of a truth that would haunt her long after the storm was gone. The morning after the scandal broke, the world seemed to move differently, colder, sharper, as if every sound carried judgment. Graytech's headquarters stood beneath the Manhattan skyline, its mirrored windows reflecting nothing but clouds. Inside, the boardroom buzzed with whispers. On the 32nd floor, behind the glass doors of the executive suite, Madeline Gray sat across from David Chen, the company's CFO, her lover, her co-conspirator, and the man who'd promised her everything Ethan never could. "They've suspended him," David said, glancing at his phone. "The board's already discussing the transfer of control. Once the shareholders see the photographs, they'll vote him out." Madeline stirred her coffee, her nails immaculate, her smile small and razor-edged. "Good," she said. "By next week, Graytech will be mine, and he'll have nothing but that little housemaid to keep him warm." David chuckled, leaning closer. "You always did underestimate him." "No," she corrected softly. "I knew him too well. Ethan only fights for what he believes in, and this time he believes he's guilty." Her tone carried something close to triumph, but deep down, it wasn't victory she wanted. It was revenge. Revenge for being unseen, unchosen, unloved. Back at the Hudson estate, Naomi stood by the window, watching the rain dissolve into mist over the river. She hadn't spoken to Ethan since last night's confession. She'd expected anger, or disappointment, or at least the end of everything between them. Instead, she found herself sitting across from him that morning at breakfast, the air thick with quiet understanding. He stirred his coffee, eyes fixed on nothing. Then, without looking up, he said, "They'll come again. Madeline and Chen. They think I've lost." Naomi's voice trembled. "Haven't you?" Ethan finally lifted his gaze. "Not yet." Something in his tone made her pause. It wasn't pride, it was certainty. A kind of calm only people who'd already suffered the worst could carry. "I've known about them for months," he said. Their accounts, the hidden transfers, the offshore fund. They used you to build their case, but I let them. Naomi stared at him. You let them. I needed proof, he said simply, and I needed them to believe they were winning. She felt a rush of disbelief and anger all at once. So I was just a pawn. Ethan finished, for her voice low. At first, yes, but not anymore. Naomi's breath caught. Then what am I now? He held her gaze for a long moment. The only person I can trust to finish this. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the rain outside. Naomi looked away, her hands tightening around the fabric of her dress. I can't, she whispered. I can't pretend anymore. Everyone already thinks I'm, let them. He interrupted gently. The world will believe what it wants, but the truth doesn't care who believes it. She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. You don't understand. I've been called names I can't repeat. I can't go through that again. Ethan leaned forward, his voice a steady calm that filled the space between them. Naomi, I don't need the world to believe me. I just need you to. The words fell softly, but struck with the weight of a lifetime. That night, the house came alive again, with quiet movement. Ethan worked in his study files spread across the desk, documents, photographs, recorded calls, evidence of betrayal written in cold ink. Naomi stood in the doorway watching him. I don't know how to do this, she said finally. I don't know how to lie and make it look like truth. He looked up, a faint smile touching his lips. You don't need to lie. You just have to let them believe what they already want to see. How? By being honest, he said, standing. Honesty terrifies liars. It makes them reveal themselves. She almost laughed through her tears. You sound like someone who still believes in people. Only one, he replied quietly. The plan was simple but brutal. They would stage another meeting between Naomi and Ethan, something intimate enough to draw Madeline and David out, something that would make them desperate to catch the final act of their own play. Ethan arranged for a dinner at the penthouse downtown, the same place where Madeline once lived. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. As Naomi dressed that evening, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The black dress borrowed from the house wardrobe, the pearls too heavy for her neck. She looked like a woman she didn't recognize, a woman who was no longer running from life, but walking straight into it. When Ethan appeared at the door, his usual composure was softened by something human. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, she answered, meeting his gaze. I do. At dinner, the city glowed beneath them, Manhattan, in its full, indifferent beauty. They talked little, but the silence between them carried more than words could. Naomi caught him watching her once the candlelight reflected in his gray eyes. You're too calm, she said softly, even now. He smiled faintly. I learned a long time ago that calm is just another kind of weapon. Against what fear? For a heartbeat, she almost reached across the table. Almost. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door burst open. Madeline stood there, immaculate in white, David behind her with a camera in hand. Her voice sliced through the air like glass. I knew it, she hissed. You couldn't even wait a week, could you? Ethan didn't move. He simply turned toward her eyes, steady, unafraid. Hello, Madeline, he said. You're right on time. David stepped forward, raising his phone. Smile for the camera, Mr. Gray. This one's going to be worth billions. Ethan's voice stayed calm. It already is. From the corner of the room, the door opened again. 2 men in gray suits entered quietly, followed by a woman carrying a recorder. Who the hell are they? Madeline snapped. Ethan met her gaze. Federal auditors. The ones you forgot to pay off. David's hand froze midair. The color drained from his face. Madeline's composure cracked. Just a flicker, but enough. Naomi stood behind Ethan, silent, watching as truth finally stepped into the room like morning light. Madeline turned on Naomi, fury, replacing fear. "You think he'll save you?" she spat. "You're nothing but a stain on his reputation. When this is over, you'll crawl back to whatever gutter you came from." Naomi's voice didn't shake this time. Maybe she said quietly, "But at least I'll be able to sleep tonight." Ethan's gaze flickered toward her, not with pride, but something deeper. Respect. Later, when the officials left, and the night grew quiet again, Naomi found Ethan on the terrace, the city stretching endlessly below them. He stood with his hands in his pockets, wind ruffling his hair. "Was it worth it?" she asked softly. He turned to her, the faintest smile on his lips. "I don't know," he said. "Ask me when I finally get my company back." She hesitated. "And if you don't," he looked at her, then really looked, as if the whole world had narrowed to this single moment. "Then at least I'll still have the only person who believed in me when I didn't deserve it." Naomi said nothing. She didn't need to. The night for once was silent, in a way that felt like peace. The night came, dressed in deception. A velvet curtain of Manhattan rain fell over the city, washing the streets in blurred reflections of gold and gray. Inside, the Regency Hotel Room 1902 waited, its lights low, champagne chilled, and curtains drawn against the world. Naomi Carter stood by the window, her reflection trembling on the glass. She was wearing the same black dress Ethan had chosen, elegant but unpretentious, the kind that whispered rather than screamed. The city lights below flickered like 1,000 eyes watching her. She had told herself this was just one last act, one final illusion to end a long chain of lies. But her hands still shook. Ethan Gray entered quietly. No suit tonight, no armor of business power, just a man composed yet weary. He handed her a glass of water instead of wine. "They'll be here soon," he said softly. Naomi nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "Are you sure this will work?" Ethan allowed himself a small, tired smile. The truth always works. It just takes its time. She wanted to believe that, but she had learned too well that truth was rarely enough to save anyone. "What if they don't come?" "They will," he replied, checking his watch. Madeline never misses her own performance. Downstairs, 2 black cars pulled up to the curb. Madeline Gray stepped out first, the flash of photographers exploding like lightning. She wore white, a deliberate choice, the betrayed wife in angelic tones. Behind her came David Chen, sharp in his tailored suit, his expression confident, greedy, and certain. "Remember," she murmured to him as they entered the elevator, "let them believe we caught them. Then let the world finish what we started." David grinned, tapping the phone in his hand. "I've already sent the alert to the press. They'll have the footage live in 10 minutes. Madeline's eyes gleamed. "Perfect." Upstairs, Naomi's pulse quickened as she heard the elevator bell. Ethan glanced toward the door, calm as still water. "When they enter, you stay behind me, no matter what they say." Naomi tried to steady her breath. "And what will you do?" "Finish the story they began." He walked toward her, his voice lower now, gentler. "Naomi, do you trust me?" She hesitated, but then quietly, "Yes." He nodded once. "Then it's enough." The door burst open. Madeline stormed in first, her voice rising before the photographers even reached the threshold. "Ethan Gray," she cried, eyes blazing for the camera. "How could you?" The flash of cameras filled the room in staccato bursts, white harsh, merciless. Behind her, David stepped in with mock indignation. "Unbelievable," he said loudly. The CEO of Greytech caught in the act, with a woman half his age. Naomi shrank back, the bright lights blinding her. The world felt unreal, like watching a play she'd already lived through once before. But Ethan didn't flinch. He rose slowly from the armchair, buttoning his jacket. His calmness unsettled everyone. "Madeline," he said simply, "you look well." "Spare me your charm," she snapped. "You're finished." He tilted his head. "Am I?" The tone of his voice made David glance toward him, uneasy for the first time. Then came the knock. Another door opened, this time from the adjoining suite. 2 men entered, followed by a woman carrying a briefcase and a badge. "Detective Reyes, Manhattan Financial Crimes Unit," the woman said, flashing her credentials. "We received your message, Mr. Gray." Madeline froze. What is this?" Ethan stepped forward, every trace of gentleness replaced by quiet authority. "This," he said, "is the real story." He turned to the officers. "The 2 individuals standing before you, Madeline Gray and David Chen, have been under internal investigation for 3 months. They've been siphoning funds from Greytech's employee pension accounts into private overseas accounts. Over $30 million. David's face went pale. "That's absurd." "I'd agree," Ethan said calmly, "if it weren't for the paper trail." He gestured toward the detective, who handed over a folder thick with documents, signed transfers, encrypted emails, recorded phone calls. The reporters, confused, began lowering their cameras. Madeline's composure cracked. "You," she hissed. "You set us up." "No," Ethan replied quietly. "You set yourselves up. I just made sure someone was watching this time." David lunged forward. "This is insane." "She made me." Madeline's voice rose to a shriek. "Don't you dare put this on me." Their argument spiraled, voices overlapping, hands pointing, years of conspiracy unraveling into chaos. Ethan stood still, watching as the detectives stepped in, separating them. For a moment, the world seemed to slow. Naomi could hear the rain tapping softly against the glass again, distant but steady. She realized she wasn't trembling anymore. For the first time since she'd stepped into this story, she wasn't anyone's pawn. She was simply there, silent, witnessing truth reclaim its place. The detectives began reading charges. David tried to push past them, but was quickly restrained. Madeline's voice, once so precise and commanding, broke into a brittle sob. As they were led away, she turned back toward Ethan, eyes filled, not with hatred, but with something more, hollow recognition. "You loved me once," she whispered. "How could you do this?" Ethan's face softened for the briefest moment. "I did love you," he said quietly. "That's why I let you destroy me first, so I could finally see who you were." Madeline's lip trembled. Then she was gone. The room fell into a heavy, echoing silence. The reporters had stopped taking photos. The detectives gathered their files. One of them nodded respectfully toward Ethan. "Mr. Gray," the officer said, "we'll take it from here." When the door finally closed behind them, Ethan turned to Naomi. She stood by the window again, arms crossed, tightly, eyes glistening, not with fear this time, but something like release. "You planned all of it," she said softly. "Every second." Ethan exhaled, weary. Not every second, just enough to let them reveal themselves. Naomi looked at him for a long time. "And me? Was I part of the plan too?" He met her gaze, and for once, no calculation lived behind it. Only truth. "At first," he said. "Then you became the only part that mattered." Outside, the city lights reflected off the wet streets, blurred and beautiful. Naomi turned back toward the glass. In it, she saw not a maid, not a pawn, not a mistake, but a woman who had stood in the eye of a storm and survived it. And behind her, Ethan Gray, the man who had once been the villain in every headline, now stood in silence, watching the rain fall like absolution. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm outside began to fade, but the one between them, the quiet human kind that comes after truth, had only just begun. The city moved on faster than grief could catch up. Within a week, Madeline Gray's name disappeared from the headlines buried beneath newer scandals. She was indicted on charges of embezzlement and fraud, escorted out of her penthouse in handcuffs beneath a swarm of flashbulbs. David Chen, the man who had whispered promises of loyalty and power, vanished before the warrants reached his door, a private jet, to somewhere without extradition, leaving behind a single glass of half-finished whiskey in his office. Graytech stabilized. Investors returned. Ethan Gray was reinstated as CEO, his reputation bruised but intact, a man both envied and pitied by the world that once worshipped him. And yet inside the mansion by the Hudson, silence settled like dust on a forgotten piano. Naomi Carter moved through that silence, carefully folding linens, closing drawers, finishing the small acts of care that had once filled her days. She no longer wore the maid's uniform Ethan had insisted she stop after the investigation ended, but she still moved with the same quiet grace, as if afraid to disturb what remained of their fragile peace. The house felt different now, lighter almost. But Naomi could sense the distance that lingered, not anger, not resentment, just the heavy stillness of two people standing on either side of something they could never name. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the gray curve of the river, Ethan found her in the library. She was returning the last of the books she had dusted. "You're leaving," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Naomi turned her hands trembling slightly. Yes, he didn't ask why. Perhaps he already knew. "I owe you an apology," he said instead, "for everything you were forced into, for not stopping it sooner." Naomi shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. You already gave me more than I deserved." He frowned. "Deserved?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile made of sorrow and gentleness at once. "You gave me your trust, Ethan. That's more precious than anything I could ever repay." That night, after he retired to his study, Naomi wrote her letter. She sat by the kitchen window, where the moonlight pooled like silver milk across the table. The same table where she had once wept in secret, where he had left her, that check where a single act of mercy had changed the course of her life. Her handwriting was careful. "Unhurried Ethan, you once told me the truth doesn't need defending, it only needs surviving. I think I finally understand what you meant. You survived your past, and because of you, I survived mine. You gave me something I had forgotten how to hold trust. And though I don't deserve it, I will spend the rest of my life trying not to break it. I'm going home. My father's surgery is done. The doctors say he'll recover slowly. The bills have all been paid by a donor who prefers to remain anonymous. I know it was you. Thank you. Don't look for me. I need to learn who I am when I'm not running, not lying, not pretending. You have your company back, your name cleared. But I hope you find something rarer peace. Yours, Naomi." She folded the letter neatly, sealing it with a single tear that fell before she could stop it. At dawn, she left. The butler found the envelope on Ethan's desk later that morning, resting beside the photo of his late brother, a quiet testament to two ghosts who had shaped his life in different ways. When he read the letter, Ethan didn't move for a long time. The words blurred not from surprise, but from the familiar ache of loss, that strange mixture of gratitude and regret that came only from loving something too late. He looked out the window at the river. The fog was lifting, and for the first time in years, the light touched the far shore. 2 days later, Naomi arrived in Savannah, Georgia, where the air smelled of salt and magnolia. Her father was already awake when she reached the hospital, frail, smiling, his eyes clear again for the first time in months. They said some foundation paid for the surgery, he said, his voice soft with disbelief. Angels must be real after all. Naomi smiled, brushing a curl from his forehead. Maybe they're just people who remember how to be kind. She didn't tell him about Ethan. Some truths were too sacred to speak aloud. The weeks passed quietly. Naomi found part-time work at a small bakery on River Street, where the mornings began with the scent of bread and the low hum of old jazz on the radio. She'd rise before dawn, braid her hair, and walk through the fog with a calm she had never known before. Sometimes she thought of the Hudson River, of that house of marble and silence, of a man who had looked at her not as a mistake, but as something real. She wondered if he still watched the rain from his window. Once, a letter arrived at the bakery, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with only one line written on it. I'm glad you stayed in the world. No name, no signature, just the familiar handwriting that made her heart ache with both memory and peace. She didn't write back. Some messages, she knew, weren't meant to begin again. They were meant to last quietly like a prayer, whispered to the wind. One evening, as the golden light faded over the marshes, Naomi sat with her father on the porch. The cicadas hummed, and the air shimmered with the slow grace of summer. Her father reached for her hand. You seem different, sweetheart, he said. Lighter. Naomi smiled, eyes drifting toward the horizon. Maybe I finally learned what it means to let go without losing. He nodded, content with an answer he didn't fully understand. Far away in New York, Ethan stood on his balcony, overlooking the city. The empire he had rebuilt hummed beneath him, alive and endless. But it was the envelope on his desk he kept returning to, the one that still smelled faintly of rain and lavender. He didn't reopen it. He didn't need to. Some words once read, "Stay written on the soul." And in that quiet moment between day and night, he realized something he had never admitted to himself before, that sometimes love doesn't ask to be returned. It only asks to be remembered. That evening the wind shifted over the Hudson, carrying with it the scent of rain and magnolia, as if the world itself remembered too. The rain in Seattle had a gentler rhythm than the storms in New York. It didn't rage. It whispered, soft, steady, patient, as if the sky itself had learned the art of forgiveness. It had been 1 year since Naomi Carter last saw Ethan Gray. 1 year since she'd left behind the mansion on the Hudson, the scandal, the headlines, the ghosts. Now she lived above a small seaside restaurant called the Mariner's Table. The place smelled of butter and thyme, with windows that fogged every morning and laughter that filled the evenings. Naomi was its head chef, not by title, but by heart. Every dish she made carried a trace of her story, quiet, imperfect, but honest. The locals adored her. They didn't know who she'd been, only who she was, now a woman who smiled more often than she cried, who wore her peace like an apron that fit just right. That night, the restaurant buzzed with warmth. It was opening night, her first, as both chef and part owner. Candles flickered in mason jars, and the scent of roasted garlic drifted through the air. Naomi moved gracefully between tables, checking plates, tasting sauces, making sure everything felt right. Outside, rain shimmered against the glass, and in that reflection she saw the faint outline of her old life, a memory both distant and familiar. She thought of her father, now stronger, sitting by the fireplace back home in Georgia, sending her small letters in shaky handwriting. She thought of the woman she used to be, the one who'd once believed love was a luxury she couldn't afford. And she thought of Ethan. She hadn't dreamed of him in months, but some nights, the smell of warm milk still found its way into her kitchen, like a ghost who refused to leave kindly. It was near closing time when the door opened. The bell chimed softly. A man stepped in from the rain. At first, Naomi thought her mind was playing tricks. He stood in the doorway, rainwater glistening on his white shirt, his hair damp, his presence impossibly familiar. Ethan Gray. Older perhaps. More human, definitely. The kind of tired that came not from defeat, but from living fully and waiting patiently. The room fell still for a moment. Even the rain seemed to pause, as though the world wanted to listen. He smiled just slightly and said, in that calm, unmistakable voice, "Do you still make warm milk for people?" Naomi, her heart skipped once then twice. She met his gaze and answered softly, "Only when they come back." He laughed then, a quiet, genuine sound that broke something open in both of them. Naomi motioned for him to sit, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped the counter. "Seattle suits you," he said, glancing around. "You finally built something for yourself." "It's small," she replied, "but it's mine." He nodded, looking at her the way a man looks at sunlight after too long in shadow. "And your father?" "Better," she said, smiling. "He's home, reading, complaining about my handwriting." "That sounds like a good sign." "It is." Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but sacred. The kind of silence that only exists between two people who've already said everything that mattered once before. Ethan reached into his coat pocket, then pulling out a thin envelope, not unlike the one she had left for him a year ago. He placed it gently on the table between them. Naomi looked down, her breath caught. It wasn't money. It wasn't a letter. It was a contract. 2 lines typed neatly in the center of the page. Term for life. Position Mrs. Gray. Naomi's eyes blurred. "Ethan." He leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "I spent years writing contracts that bound people with ink and signatures. But this one," he paused, searching her face, "this one I want to write with something I can't erase." She swallowed tears, catching in her throat. "After everything, after what I did." Ethan shook his head gently. "You didn't break me, Naomi. You showed me where I'd already been broken." He smiled, then the soft, tired smile of a man who'd made peace with both his past and his heart. And if forgiveness can build empires, then it can build a home too. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, tapping against the windows like an audience holding its breath. Naomi looked at him, her vision swimming through tears she no longer tried to hide. "You could have found someone easier," she whispered. He chuckled softly. "I did, you." She laughed through her tears, shaking her head. "You always did know how to ruin a moment." "Or fix it," he said. Then almost shyly, he pushed the envelope closer. "Say yes, Naomi. Not to the name, not to the promise, to the life we didn't get to finish." Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The paper felt warm, somehow alive. "Do you mean this?" she asked. "With everything I am," he said simply. For a long heartbeat, she said nothing. Then slowly she nodded, a small, quiet nod that carried the weight of every mistake, every miracle that had led them here. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes, Ethan, but only if you still like your milk warm." He laughed again, and this time it sounded like home. Outside, the rain came down in silver sheets, softening the lights, blurring the edges of the world. Ethan rose from his chair and reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. They stood by the window as thunder murmured in the distance, watching droplets race each other down the glass. Naomi's head rested against his shoulder. He leaned closer and whispered, "Do you remember the night we met?" "I remember," she said. "The rain, the milk, the lie." "And this time?" he asked. She smiled through her tears. "The rain, the truth, the beginning." In that moment, something shifted. Not grandly, not loudly, but deeply. The kind of love that doesn't ask for applause, only understanding. Outside, the sea hummed against the shore. Inside, the warmth of the kitchen wrapped around them like a promise kept. Ethan reached into his pocket one last time and placed a simple gold ring on the table. No diamonds, no fanfare, just honesty. Naomi traced its circle with her fingertip, unbroken, unending. She slipped it on her voice, barely a whisper. "I guess some contracts are worth signing." He smiled, drawing her close as the rain fell harder, the sound steady and forgiving. Sometimes God lets our stories begin with a lie, not to punish us, but to lead us toward the one heart that tells the truth.